There you go. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, December 5th, Radnor School District Policy Committee meeting. Let's see, do we have anybody new to welcome? Nobody new tonight yet. Let's get right underway with administrative remarks. Dr. Robarczyk.
Good evening, everybody. So from the November meeting, we had two questions that we're taking from the minutes. One was a question regarding the GRCC meeting, whether it could be held and the district still be in compliance with sunshine law, since in this week's Suburban at that time, the meeting times were different than the actual times. So we did investigate this, and the correct times of the meeting were located in the legal notices under the classifieds section of the newspaper, where they're required. The time and announcements that were located on page 2 of the newspaper are provided as a courtesy from the newspaper, and the district does not provide any of that information. So it's put in there by the newspaper itself, and we really don't have any control over that. It's just a reminder that's in the front of the paper. The second question is the district following the competitive food guidelines on page 3 of the wellness policy. I did look into this with our business administrator and our food service consultant, and yes, we do follow the competitive food guidelines as they're outlined in the policy. And our consultant actually is the one who ensures that we maintain compliance with this process. As regards to tonight's agenda, we have 2 agenda items. This evening, administration will be presenting Policy 907, School Visitors. Policy was presented at the November board business meeting where it was passed the first read. And we're presenting this policy for final revisions and then recommending to be placed on the agenda for the December board business meeting for a second read and adoption. The second agenda item for this evening will be a review/reflection of the 2016-2017 policy committee goals that are cited on the website. The first goal is the work of the policy committee to identify a process by which policies are prioritized when they come before the policy committee for consideration and review of each month. Goal number 2 is identify all outstanding policies and administrative regulations that are discussed but not acted on from the previous year and make sure they are brought up to date. And that third goal is identifying all policies and ARs that are not in compliance with identified local, state, and federal mandates. So we'll address those 3 goals in our second agenda item.
Thank you, Dr. Robarczyk. Let's see, I'd like to call forward anyone with public comment. Hopefully you've had a chance to sign in at the side table and read our guidelines for public participation. Welcome, Dr. Winters.
Good evening, Roberta Winters, 326 Williams Road in Rosemont. My only comment regarding the school visitors policy has to do with past practice, which may no longer be a practice, which was during American Education Week, people from the community could go into the public schools and observe, and they were not necessarily parents or professional employees or guardians. They were people from the community could come and visit the schools and observe what was happening. So I don't know if that you need to have any coverage for an event like that, or if you just do not encourage people from the community to visit public schools during American Education Week. Thank you.
Welcome, Mrs. Spurtle.
Cindy Spurtle, 106 Valley Forge Terrace, Wayne. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Robarczyk, for the information on the notification. My question is, what publication does Radnor Township School District notify? And is it in the form of an advertisement? And also, since I would say the majority of the people in Radnor Township are reading the Suburban, is that something that, as a follow, I know they do it as a courtesy, but is it something that the school might easily add, and that would be notification of mainline media news, just as you do for the, might eliminate some of the confusion on the meeting times and schedules. I don't know if that's allowed, if that would have to be part of a policy, but as a courtesy, I know they look on the website as to the time, but is it something that could be included in at the time you're notifying the publication you're legally required to notify. And on the policy, I've always been curious about this in attending all the meetings for policy that I've attended. When the policy goes for first reading to the board, are there ever any changes made when it comes back to committee and then goes back for a second read? And if there are changes made, how are they identified for those of us who review the policies to see what changes were actually made rather than having to go back and forth? And also, just a reminder, after reading the policy committee goals for 2016-17, I guess it's just a review of the policy committee goals to see how you have done, since we're almost coming to the end of 17. These were last year's goals. The acronym SMART are the goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time sensitive. And since the discussion of the review of the policy committee goals for 16-17, which is what we're going over, did you accomplish those goals, since we're almost at the tail end of that year? If I read this correctly. Thank you.
Welcome, Mrs. Sherry.
Thank you. Judy Sherry, Governor Circle, Newtown Square. I guess because of learning about 4 different executive sessions related to the PLO amendment proposed in the township, I wanted to look back and try to understand the legal justification for those executive sessions. And our policy 006 discusses executive session and gives the following matters that can be included in an executive session: employment issues, labor relations, purchase or lease of real estate, consultation with an attorney or other professional advisor regarding potential litigation or identifiable complaints that may lead to litigation, matters that must be conducted in private to protect a lawful privilege or confidentiality. Those were the reasons that we state in our policy 006. So I looked at those reasons and went to the Pennsylvania Freedom of Information Coalition website, which discusses executive sessions. Before I say that, I want people to understand again that the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act has a fundamental principle, which is to provide the public access to meetings where the public's business is discussed. That's one of the fundamental important aspects of the Sunshine Act. So, among other things, I tried to consider how, when this PLO amendment was discussed by the Planning Commission on a number of occasions, in public, the Board of Commissioners on a number of occasions in public, why the school board had to go into executive session to discuss this issue. Didn't really make sense to me. And when I looked at the possibility of litigation, which I think that was one of the reasons that was stated, one of the discussions on this website pointed to a court decision that said that executive sessions requirements must be specific. So a city council had announced an executive session to discuss matters of litigation. A newspaper objected to the closed meeting because the litigation matters were not announced with specificity. The trial court ruled the council must spell out, in connection with existing litigation, the names of the parties, etc. Regarding identifiable complaints or threatened litigation, the court ordered counsel to state the general nature of the complaint, but not the identity of the complainant. The position of the trial court was upheld on appeal. The appellate court stated, even though it is in the public interest that certain matters be discussed in private, the public has a right to know what matter is being addressed in private sessions. The reasons stated by the agency must be specific. So I've kind of mentioned specific a number of times. These are supposed to be lawsuits already filed or pending suits where there is a real reason to expect action to be filed, not just someone making vague threats or an issue where the potential for anyone to file a complaint is possible. I think that's really important to know because in our last meeting, there were different things that were talked about, putting lime down on the field, for example, fixing security cameras, and as one of the attendees mentioned to me, look, all of these are potential for future lawsuits. Somebody could say, I have an allergy to lime. Someone could say, I want my privacy. I don't want security cameras. So you have to have something that looks imminent if it's going to be potential litigation. So I'm back to asking this committee, why were there 4 executive sessions on an issue that can so impact a number of our parents, our students, our taxpayers, our residents, when these issues were discussed in public by 2 other governmental agencies? And I'm pretty confident that we're not discussing them because we're thinking of buying the property. So I don't think it was a matter of real estate or leasing real estate. So I'd like to really understand much better why there's an excuse to go into an executive session and then come out with a letter. And also because I think this is such an important issue. This issue is going to be decided this Monday. It's coming up very quickly, and the school board has virtually said nothing on something that could change and affect this site for years and years to come. So I'd like to understand that. Thank you.
Mrs. Sherry, could you turn off that mic, please? Sure. Oh, wait, one more public comment. Welcome, Mrs. Dunn.
Hi, Sarah Dunn, 13 Blackfriar Road. I actually have a couple comments on the policy at issue. Is that possible? Yeah. Just questions. So I think that in the paragraph 24 PS section 407, there's a sentence that reads, the individual, so it's talking about somebody who's on the property who hasn't been properly registered and is trespassing. And it says the individual will be asked to return to the school's office to register or will be asked to leave immediately. So I have 2 kind of questions, not criticisms, questions. The individual will be asked to return to the school's office. Is that just by whoever finds them, or is there someone specific who's supposed to, like, is any teacher or other visitor authorized to make that request? And then just the way the wording works, it says will be asked to return to the school's office to register or will be asked to leave immediately. Is it steps 1 and 2? If they don't return to the office, do they have to leave immediately? Or is it at the option of the requester whether to ask them just to leave because they haven't registered in the office? And you may not have the answer. I just wanted to make sure you understood. I see a little bit of vagueness there. That was it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Turn that off.
Thanks. All right, so has everyone had a chance to read the minutes? Do we have any, we're good with the minutes for the meeting? Okay, with that, we will get underway with agenda item number 4, which is policy 907, school visitors. It was here last month. It was up for first read in November. It's back here for second read. And I hope everyone saw that we had a new version posted on the website as of yesterday morning, the corrected version. And let's proceed from there.
In reviewing the policy, I have 2 comments in the purpose. One is, and it's around the words educational professionals, only because when you look at the mention of education professionals on page 2, in this purpose, they're referred to as educational professionals and they're not capitalized. And on page 2, they're referred to as education, not educational professionals, and they are capitalized.
Whoa. You're looking at the red line version, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I think that your page 2 is different from my page 2, but I believe that capitalization is, the spacing is not correct, but that's the title of that section.
Correct.
That's the reason that it's that it's capitalized. So there's a space missing on that, Dr. Robarczyk. It was meant to be, that section is called parent classroom site and or education professional visitations. And that's the reason that it's capitalized.
Okay, but that doesn't answer why they're
Oh, yeah, no, we have to-
educational at the top
Yep.
and education at the bottom.
So we'll clarify, just make
Correct.
that
We'll
consistent.
clarify that. We'll make it consistent.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Was there anything else?
Nope.
All right. Julia?
To Sarah's point,
Oh, your mic's not on, Jill.
That last paragraph, the individual will be asked to return to the school's office to register or will be asked to leave immediately. Is it an or else will be asked to leave? Is that like a consequence or is it that the
Oh,
school designee can say?
I think we intended it to mean, if you're on the property, you either need to go to the office and register, as we've outlined for school visitors, or you will be asked to leave, or else you will, I think we should add or else you will be asked to leave immediately. And with regard to I believe it's, anyone on the property is, any employee is kind of duly charged with making note if someone has a visitor's badge. Maybe you two could clarify
Right,
for that.
and that'll be specific, more specific in the AR.
Right.
In regards to school personnel, that will be that individual. But in here, it's just to identify that they will be asked to leave.
Right, so let's add the word else, because I do think that makes sense. And then, Dr. Robarczyk, which is the correct term, education professionals or educational professionals?
Educational professionals.
Okay,
So I've made that correction
alrighty.
for the title.
Regarding there was a comment, and I just kind of like to clean it up because it's pertinent right this particular moment. Mike, when we have a policy for first read and it's approved at a board meeting, it's actually possible that we could make an amendment right at the board meeting and vote on an amendment for first read. And then it comes back to us for second read. And there are some guidelines. If we make some minor changes, maybe you could just review for people who are wondering about that process. And then I think, to just follow up on that, I think the notion of, red lines and blue lines, different color versions, answers, kind of addresses the how do you know if changes have been made.
Correct.
But if you could give us the guidelines on that, thanks.
Right, sure. Once it goes to the board for first read, a number of things can happen. It can either be passed as is, or there can be discussion in which the board as a whole will suggest that there be some changes or tweaks or alterations to the policy. Then it comes back to committee. If it's just passed as is and comes back to the committee again for review, it's basically just being reviewed for the reasons like we did here today, to clean up language issues, to make sure that there aren't any problems with respect to the flow of the document, or if there's an issue with a citation or something of that nature. It's not coming back to have substantive changes being made to the policy. It's just coming back to make sure that the way that it's written is fully been vetted and there aren't any mistakes or problems with it. And then it goes back to the board for adoption as a second. If at the board meeting, the board on the first read reviews the policy and determines that there should be some substantial changes made at the general board meeting, then it comes back to the policy committee meeting for incorporation of those changes, and then it goes back up on a first read again.
Anyway, thank you. So I, just wanted to kind of clarify that up. So with regard to the policy, do you have anything else?
I did have one
All right, sure.
procedural question. So it looks like this policy was revised on October 22nd, 2013. Given that we're now doing something to it in 2017, do those both dates stay on the policy as revisions having occurred twice, or do we replace the 2013 with the 2017?
No, it'll be noted that both dates will remain on the policy.
Okay, thanks.
We
That's the
don't
way-
no, I think the revised date just changes. It was originally adopted March 25th, 2008. We don't start putting a series of revision dates on.
We've had those in other policies. We've had.
Is that when
multiple-
they've been reviewed and then or
No, I've seen what Tony's
Revised.
talking about. There might not be consistency to the way
Yeah,
that's
is
been
there a-
applied,
I
but
think it just
point of
keeps a
law on that
history.
one?
Now, you can do it either way you want, but however you do it, it ought to be done consistently so that each policy, if you do want to have the policy reflect all the number of times it's been revised, that's fine. It should just be done that way consistently.
Correct.
And if it hasn't been consistent in the past, then moving forward, there should be some type of a decision made as to how it's going to be done.
The review dates have been removed and changed when it's been reviewed, but revised, we've added dates. Pardon?
Not all of
I know, it is inconsistent, I will say that. So I'll take the recommendation of the committee in moving forward.
Do we have a thought on this one way or the other?
Well, if you post all these revision dates, but you can't tell what has changed from one version to the next, what's the point in listing all the dates?
Well, that's what I think, plus which I think, practically speaking, you are going to run out of room up in that title page. That chart that we have,
Yes.
where a bunch of dates are listed, to me, internally, that seems to make sense, that you might want to know internally when different work happened. We actually found that helpful
Right.
in our endeavor.
Yes, we did.
I'm not sure that it adds value on the actual policy. Andrea or Andrew, do you have an opinion on that one? All right.
Comments on the policy itself?
And then, sorry, my voice is really not so strong tonight. Do you have any thoughts on the policy?
Nope, that was addressed.
Okay, all righty. Yeah, I mean, I would be inclined to just leave the most recent revision date, or review date. Review date's super important because some of them we have to actually
Correct.
review, specifically.
Yes, Ken, maybe.
Oh, yeah. Do you have a thought, Ken?
I actually think Julie's comments make sense, that, if we're not gonna track it, everybody might as well put the most recent. That makes sense.
Okay, so
But we'll still keep a memorialized within the
Internally.
chart itself, so
Yes.
we know.
That makes sense.
Okay,
All right.
thank you for that answer.
Alrighty, well then, moving on to agenda item number 2, I'd like to just give a little bit of background. So, I thought coming to the end of a year, likely committee assignments will be made and start in January. However, Mrs. Solomon decides to proceed with that. And so I thought this was probably a good time, as good a time as any, to just take a look at, where we tried to go this past year and what work still needs to be done here, good, bad, or otherwise. And I know that I really appreciate all the work that the administration has done. We've had a lot of transition even in our policy committee this year. Dr. Stevenson was here. We brought on Dr. Stevenson and Dr. Abarchek, and now it's just Dr. Abarchek. We brought in a new superintendent. I mean, we've had a lot of changes. And so with that, why don't we just talk about the goals for
Sure.
a few minutes?
So goal number 1, the work with policy committee to identify a process by which the policies are prioritized when they come before the policy committee for consideration. As I noted in this on my comments, I believe the committee has been successful in achieving this goal based on the process of prioritizing the policies that have been brought forward for the development and/or review. The committee will continue to proceed with this process as maintained as a goal for 2018, and that prioritized process, which is also on the website, was changes that we looked at policies that have changes in state law or code, recommendations from the solicitor, recommendations from administration, recommendations from members of the policy committee, and internal review of current policies that are needing update. So we will continue with that process as it seems to have worked pretty well over the past 12 months.
Do we, as a group, do we feel like that list of prioritization has kind of brought to the surface the work that needs to be done? Do we have any other thoughts on it?
Not saying it's perfect, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard because you don't know what you don't know.
Fair comment. I guess it's not really so much the work of this policy committee, but, I do think that as part of working with the administration, either in leadership or then bringing it to the board, it's also certainly possible that events can occur that would say, hey, you know what, we really need to do a policy on thus and such. And in fact, I think that while this policy committee can't dictate to the rest of the board, certainly I think the board can say, nope, something needs to be dealt with and we need a policy for it. And, I think that can also be, practically speaking, a very real instigator of policy work. Mm-hmm. When we see a need as a board. Alrighty. So then goal number 2?
Goal number 2 is identify all outstanding policies and administrative regulations that were discussed but not acted on from the previous year and make sure they are brought up to date. In my response to this one, I think that although some of the administrative regulations that were discussed but not acted on have been addressed, there's still work that needs to be completed, and administration myself will be making this a priority project for the 2018 goals. I think we worked at the cross-referencing component of the various policies, but in regards to administrative regulations, I think this is something that there's still room for improvement, that we can move forward in getting these in place.
Okay, so I would agree. Particularly because as we become kind of dependent on making the administrative regulations the heart of the detail, it is particularly important that this, stay timely. I don't know if Julia or Amy, if you have any feedback as well?
No.
Okay.
We worked on something over the summer, Julia, Susan, and I, in reviewing the status of policies and ARs. And in connection with goal number 2, there are still things from July that haven't been fixed. So is it the intention to get these done by the end of the next year? And that's going to be...
I would make it sooner than that. I'm just saying I want to make it a goal for 2018 to make this a priority item that I address.
Okay, so with those things, I'll share them with policy leadership, and you can
Please.
jump from there. Okay.
Okay.
Goal number 3, identify all policies and ARs that are not in compliance with identified local, state, and federal mandates. This is one I feel like administration has worked in collaboration with the solicitor's office to identify and bring all policy and ARs not in compliance with the identified local, state, and federal mandates. We'll continue this process in working in collaboration with the solicitor's office to assure compliance with all policies and ARs. This is one that we took on a number that we were out of compliance, and I want to say there's 4 or 5 that we really brought up to date at least and continue to work on.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that actually last year I thought was inordinate the number of federal mandates and state mandates that came through that really required immediate attention needed to be addressed. Ken and Mike, I don't know if either one of you wants to weigh on this one as well. Just, this is kind of the higher level piece that drives some of our work. I don't know if you have thoughts on any of this.
Not a specific thought other than just that this is something that crops up every single year with the passage of the budget, because there are always school code amendments that get passed along with that, and a variety of them usually require some action on a policy front. And it just depends upon how active the federal agencies are with respect to their mandates that they push down on how this gets handled. But it's certainly something that's on our radar that we look at every year when the new budget gets passed and as new legislation comes to highlight things that require policy work. And we try to highlight that to the district as well in the solicitor update to advise, when things require policy work or attention.
Okay.
And I do also feel as though with the continued implementation of ESSA that, as things come down the pike, we are addressing them as they become known to us.
Ladies, do you have any comments?
I do not.
Ken? All right. Well, go ahead.
It occurs to me, identified local, state, and federal mandates. What is a local mandate as opposed to a state
Radnor
mandate?
Township? Delaware County?
Delaware County,
Gotcha.
correct, yes.
Okay.
All righty.
So based on the review and reflections of these goals, as this administration will be presenting its new goals for the upcoming year at the January 2018 Policy Committee meeting.
If I wanted to propose potentially another goal, would this be the time to do it, or would you prefer it in new business?
I think we're going to flow right. I think we're going to flow right into new business, unless Andrew or Andrea have anything to add. All righty. So why don't you take it from there?
Just food for thought. I was wondering what you would think of considering that each year we aim to collaborate or work in tandem with other initiatives undertaken in the district to make sure that from a policy perspective, we are supporting the outcomes of those initiatives. And I know that that's something that the person spearheading the project might be charged with, but just to make sure that the policies that we have are appropriate to initiatives that we're undertaking, would that be something that we should put out there as a goal?
Wait, could you say that again? I'm not sure I followed your,
For example, the technology integration study.
yeah.
There may be policies on our books, acceptable use, homework, whatever, variety of policies that could really inform the work of the initiative. So is it helpful to have that as a goal of the policy committee? Because I'm not sure that it's always reflexively done when we do an initiative, that we look at some things from a policy perspective. But what if some of the aspects of the initiative really need to be supported by policy in order to optimize the outcome of the work on the initiative? How do we ensure that that happens? Maybe it's unnecessary, maybe it's not a policy thing, but it often occurs to me that things that we're doing, can really, we should be looking at our policies as we do them.
Sure, and I almost think we can make that part of the policy prioritization piece of the internal review of current policies that need updating. Almost having a subcategory of new initiatives that are a part of what's going on, and just
Great
make it a
idea.
review, a constant review. So,
So I would say, we have two major initiatives right now, the Sleep and School Start Time Task Force and the Technology Integration Study. They're big projects. And I can think off the top of my head of at least 2 or 3, if not more, policies that apply to those that may not need changing, but it's probably worth looking at what we have on the books to make sure that they're optimally supporting
So
whatever we're doing.
Here's my question.
Wait, oh, yeah, you are.
Let's take the sleep study, for example. We haven't come to any conclusions on it, and we're doing all this work. It sounds like we're putting the carts before the horse if we're going to be changing policy to support it.
I wasn't suggesting that we would change policy, but I think it's important to put into the context of the work we do as an initiative, what is our current policy? In case, as we come closer to some sort of outcome on the initiative, we know that there is something about the policy that doesn't support the outcome we want.
So I hear what Julia's saying, and I think sleep study is a perfect example of this. So I would not suggest that this is a goal for the policy committee. I would more say that in the context of the policy committee, and we're the ones thinking about policy, that it's important to say when we have initiatives like the adolescent sleep need task force group or the technology integration group, that when those things get started, we need to ask Ken and his administration, please be sure to be thinking about it in the context of our existing policies. Because, for example, to your point, Julia, we don't have a decision yet on adolescent sleep needs and start times. But if it were to result in a change to start times, we would then have a number of policies that would need changing. But we wouldn't change the policies unless there was a difference.
that was my understanding. I was thinking
exactly.
the full day kindergarten example when we
Correct.
transitioned. Our transportation
Had to be changed.
had to be changed because it was a half day pickup. So I was more reflecting on the piece that when a recommendation is provided to administration and when and if action is taken, then yes, a review has to be completed. So,
But Amy's also saying something different. She's saying that, I think, that as we're going through initiatives, the committee and the administrators working on those initiatives need to be mindful of our existing policies, because that might inform some of the work you do. And then, depending on the end result, yes, then our policy committee might end up with work. It's kind of,
Right.
It's literally both of your perspectives blended together, and all of it needs to occur, I think is really what Amy's saying.
So what were you proposing, Tony, again, to modify goal 1 or something?
well, I was actually looking at the process we use for prioritizing policy in the district.
Oh, right,
Under
okay.
the changes in state law and code and so on, and actually adding a subcategory to the internal review of current policies that need updating by having that sub-bullet that talks about initiatives that are occurring within the district and then when final actions are taken.
Okay,
So-
well, I don't ask the committee as a whole what they think, but I did like that suggestion that you made, and I'd be interested to know what the rest of the committee thinks, because I think it's important to have something there to prompt us to remember to look at those things. We may be going down a certain path with regard to transportation or homework. If we don't know for sure what we already are charged with doing and complying with, then I just think it's a good exercise to have that context as we think about other things that aren't the same exact thing.
Thoughts?
I'm a little unclear what we're proposing.
Well, I think what I can do is when I bring forward the goals for next month, I think I can make it in a very more clear
Okay.
presentation
Yeah,
that would be
of what
wonderful.
exactly
Thank
we're
you.
talking about.
That's exactly I was just going to make that suggestion. Tonight was the night to talk about the past year. Let this inform some work for next year. Amy's brought up a good point. I think you did clarify the cart before the horse issue about it, which comes first, and, that will let Dr. Robarczyk clarify, and it will be, next year's committee to discuss and really agree upon the goals. I actually wouldn't feel comfortable kind of rubber stamping or agreeing to goals now when we don't have our fourth committee member. So next month is a more appropriate short conversation about this. All righty. With that, do we have any other new business? No? Okay. Great. Let's have our final public comment. Actually, as you step up, come on up, Dr. Roberta. Dr. Robarczyk, the question that was asked at the beginning of public comment about the executive session, I'm going to ask you to refer that to the superintendent's office to handle, because it was an executive session of the board, not of this policy committee. So I don't think it's best answered at a committee level. So I'm just going to ask you to bring that to the administration and to Mr. Batchelor's office to manage that question.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. And second public comment.
I just wanted to mention relative to policy 907, I think most of it has to do with parents and guardians and educational professionals and others as they enter into the school building. As a person who was employed in the school district, I think perhaps it's going to be addressed in the administrative regulations that sometimes people are not in the buildings, but they're on the school property. And I don't know what the procedure is there, but if you're concerned about the safety of students and the disruption of instruction, I know in buildings, if there are people outside the windows, it can be disruptive to instruction and also could potentially be a safety issue.
I don't know if we have any other public comment. Oh, we do. I just wanted to say quickly that with regard to that comment about Education Week, that visitors who have a valid interest, certainly National Education Week is we welcome everyone to come to our schools, and we do have a procedure for it, and that's why we say those who have a valid interest. That's certainly a week that anyone is welcome to come in and see what we're doing in these schools. Mrs. Spurtle?
Thank you. Cindy Spurtle, Wayne, PA. To further clarify, and thank you for answering what happens with policies that are sent up for first reading and then second read. Curiosity was, have policies ever come back after first read from the full board with suggestions, or it's just, okay, that was the one question. And I also, although per Ms. Stern, the executive session meetings about this PLO coming up, PLO vote on December 11th is going to be going forward to the superintendent. I'd also like to know that it is part of the policy that everything, our policies, our Radnor Township School District policies, to be discussed in public. And as a result of this, as a result of where the school board stands on this PLO vote that's going to be made on the new properties across the street from the high school, has not been discussed in public, but discussed behind closed doors in executive sessions. We're up against the proverbial you-know-what, and the public doesn't know how the school board feels on this, and it doesn't look like that they're going to know except in letter form, but not in discussion. So just bringing that forward again, that it should have been discussed in public.
Do we have any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.